In 2009, in the middle of the night, Roderick Scott woke to the sound of someone outside. Three people were in his driveway moving across the street and then were trying the doors on vehicles in that driveway. Roderick went back into the house, told his girlfriend to call 911, and grabbed his handgun. No one could have predicted what would happen next. Shots were fired, someone was dead. Did justice prevail in the town of Greece after something went bump in the night? Welcome back to What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Philip Tomaso. How we doing today? I am Philip Tomaso, and today is Monday, May 8th, 2023. Episode 12, A Bump in the Night. This one hit pretty hard in the area of Rochester, New York, when it took place back in 2009. I just want to start this off by saying on the promo artwork for this particular episode, there's an image of a 40 caliber handgun. This is not Roderick Scott's handgun. That is a Smith & Wesson, my 40 caliber Smith & Wesson. I used its image only because a 40 caliber semi-automatic handgun was used in this story. I figured I might as well use a picture of my own handgun. I did not or could not find a copy image of the actual handgun used in this case. This is also an interesting case. If you've been listening to my podcasts all along, you know I'm very pro-victim. I show little to no remorse or sympathy or empathy for the criminals who commit crimes I've covered. Today, you're going to see a slightly different side of me. We're going to jump the fence on this one. Today, I'm going to be advocating, and rightly so, on behalf of the one charged with murder, manslaughter to be exact. It's all about justice in my eyes. Which side of the coin I'm landing on is, or should be, the same side, justice. That is, it should be on the side of justice. And that obviously won't or can't always be the case. There's differences of opinions and all of that. Regardless, I'm going to report the facts in this case to the best of my ability based on the research I conducted, but I will probably be interjecting with a bit more personal feelings, like I usually do, and I'll strive to keep the episode as unbiased as possible. But I suspect, as I have stated, listeners will pick up quickly where I stand on this case and the facts surrounding it. Not just because I pointed it out just now, but by listening to everything as it unfolds. Like I was saying, this murder was big in local and some national news outlets back in 2009 for some very interesting reasons, and again, rightly so, I suppose. You know, you know what though? Enough of this preamble, okay? let's move right into the episode. Episode 12 again. It's called A Bump in the Night. And here we go. I'm not going to waste any more time just rambling. So let's go back in time. It's early Saturday morning, April 4th, 2009. It's around 3 a.m. It's a cloudy, kind of windy early morning. The temperatures are around 35 degrees. None of this uncommon for early spring in Rochester, that's for sure. 58 Banbury Way is a suburban address in Greece, New York, within Monroe County. The suburb areas of Monroe County outline the city of Rochester, which in and of itself resembles something of a splatter of cobwebs from an aerial point of view. The city of Rochester does, and then the suburbs surround it. This particular home sits in the center of a large corner lot, butting up to Manitou Road, more or less. There's another house on Manitou, and they kind of share a section of yard, but it's the last house on that street up to Manitou. It has 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and it's nearly 2,000 square feet. It's got an attached 2-car garage, and the house was built in 2007. And it so this is going to get confusing, but it actually borders another suburban area, the village of Hilton. Like I said, it's confusing, but so Greece, Hilton, they're right next to each other. There's like the line between the town and the village right there. But if you look at it, uh, first responders like the fire department and police are dispatched from the town of Greece and not from Hilton. So the North Greece Fire Department and the Greece Police Department have Banbury in their district lines, and not the Hilton Fire Department or the Monroe County deputies. Honestly, though, that's neither here nor there. Other than I'm trying to make an early point that we are a long way from the city of Rochester for what's about to unfold for these events. This is important, though, because a lot of people think mistakenly that crime and violent crime at that and drug related crimes only happen in the city. And this is not true. Almost half of the episodes I've covered to date involve some hideous crimes that happen outside of the city of Rochester, beyond the stigma that suburbs are good and city is bad. But at this time, back to our case, Roderick Scott's 42. I've also seen that he was 41. Um, but he had an argument with his common law wife, his girlfriend, and found himself sleeping on the sofa downstairs in the family room. As indicated, around 3 a.m., he heard noises and the sound of voices outside. They woke him up uh, from where he was sleeping, and he opened the front door, deciding to see what was going on outside. What he saw were three people in his driveway, and he watched them then cross the street and go into the neighbor's yard. There, the three people were pulling on the door handle of Roderick's neighbor's truck. So they're no longer in his driveway, but they went directly across the street, and now they're trying to get access to his neighbor's truck. So Roderick goes back inside and he goes upstairs and he wakes up his girlfriend and he quickly told her what was going on outside. And he says, there's people out there and they're trying to break into vehicles. He instructed her to call 911. He retrieved his handgun, slipped it into his waistband, and Roderick Scott, as you know, as I'm going to tell you, had a permit to own and carry a handgun. This is not an illegal firearm. He is licensed to carry it. Roderick would later testify he grabbed his gun to protect himself. His only intent at this point was to stop or detain the potential thieves until the police arrived. And it makes perfect sense. Going outside of his house, Roderick saw the dome light on inside his neighbor's vehicle across the street from his, and there was one person on the sidewalk. He figured the other two were rummaging through the vehicle they'd just broken into. At this point, Roderick draws his handgun from the holster and he chambers around. He testified that he wanted to protect himself and he intended to. There's three people outside, two committing a crime and a third on the sidewalk. He is outnumbered. Roderick then started walking toward the person on the sidewalk. That person saw Roderick and started walking toward the main intersection, towards Manitow Road. He wasn't far away from the person or from the sidewalk, and then he noticed the other two still in the neighbor's vehicle uh, that they'd been moments before rifling through. So he testified that he took a shooter stance at this point. And there are actually three different types of shooter stances. This is bizarre, but there's the isosceles, the weaver, and the fighting. For the isosceles, the shooter faces the target squarely. The feet are set shoulder width apart, basically, and the toes are facing the target, and everything's all in alignment. And his knees would be flexed at an angle, and the various somewhat and the angle is going to vary somewhat, and the shooter leans forward from the waist towards the target. And the shooter's arms are extended and form basically an isosceles triangle. For the weaver, which has become more popular and replaced the isosceles for many people, the shooter stands with his shoulder blades and his body, placing the foot on the firing side back and turning the support side towards the target, and the shooter's strong or firing arm is extended and the support arm's elbow is bent. This allows the shooter to employ a very stable push-pull grip, and the shooter pushes with his firing arm and pulls with the support arm to stabilize the weapon. Okay, and the last one, I know these are, I'm just trying to give you so you can picture it. In the fighter stance, the shooter is square to the target, and his feet are shoulder width or slightly wider, and the firing side foot is slightly behind the support side foot, and for the most part feels very similar to the isosceles stance. I just go through this just so you could picture this. How I don't know which one he took, but they're all kind of similar. Anyway, it's a bit of a digression there, but that's what he was testifying. He took a shooter stance. So Roderick said he took the shooter stance because he didn't know what he was up against, or even if the three suspects were armed. I would almost assume they were. At this point, he told the three of them to stop and that he had a gun and that someone inside his house was calling the police. He knew he lived on the outskirts of town. He worried they would all get away before the police arrived, so he thought he could hold them in place until then. For an intense moment, if you can picture this, a standoff, for an intense moment, no one moved. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. No one else said a thing. And then the two in the neighbor's driveway started talking. One suddenly ran around to the front of the truck he had just been stealing from, while the other charged down the driveway screaming, either "I'll get you" or "I'll get him." And then he ran directly at Roderick. Roderick again said, "I have a gun," and he testified that he felt if this guy reached him, he might get hurt or killed during this attack. He was also outnumbered should the other two decide to jump in. So at that moment, Roderick made the decision, a split decision, to protect himself, and he fired his weapon twice. The person shot and killed was Christopher Cervini, a 17-year-old white male who lived in the village of Hilton. And if I haven't mentioned it, if I didn't mention it before, maybe because it's not important, not to me, and truly not for this episode, but it did get some national spotlight, including from President Obama, because Roderick Scott is black. But Obama didn't begin mentioning Roderick and Cervini until 2012 or 2013 after the Trayvon Martin shooting. After that occurred, because people drew lines comparing the two incidents. A Hispanic male shot a black teen, a black male shot a white teen. And they tried to make it this big racial thing. And I don't see it. So I'm not going to get into all of that. There's no denying Roderick found himself on the short end of the stick. Zimmerman, the man who shot and killed Martin, was eventually acquitted and he'd been charged with, I believe it's second-degree murder. The issues I found while doing my research stem from how the aftermath of each case impacted communities, whether it be vocal preachers, protests, marches, or more of a silence. Okay, if you follow where I'm going with that without me getting all into it, none of these other things except for silence really seem to happen on this particular case. Mostly, there was people talking. Don't get me wrong. So sometimes results are authentic and sometimes they mislead or are misguided. Manufactured might be the word I'm looking for. Sometimes results are authentic and sometimes they are manufactured. But again, none of that is here nor there. Not for this case, not for this episode. What people do when something happens is what people do. If they do things differently, depending on the case, then they do things differently depending on the case. I don't care. Anyway, Roderick was arrested and charged with manslaughter for fatally shooting Christopher Cervini. Unfortunately, New York has proven to be a state that almost enjoys coddling actual criminals, even more so these last few years. Appearance tickets are handed out for most crimes committed instead of arrests, instead of jail and bail. They just get appearance tickets, even for violent crimes, which they said that wouldn't be the case in New York. However, it is. So naturally, the Cervini family saw the merits of the case in a much different light. People judged Roderick because he was big and built like a football player, and he had pointed a gun at three smaller than him white teenagers. The family believed their 17-year-old son was brutally murdered and felt as if it was their son on trial and not Roderick. And I assume they felt this way because during the trial, the family heard facts they either already knew and chose to ignore, or were hearing facts for relatively the first time and elected not to believe or accept anything negative being said about their son or their nephew or their cousin or their friend. They didn't want to believe what they were hearing about Christopher Savini. So I want to try to piece together what happened that night from the testimony, toxicology reports, and so on. We can start it by identifying the three teens who were out at 3 a.m. breaking into cars. Christopher Savini, age 17, the one we've been talking about most of this episode. Then there's his friend Brian Hopkins. He was the one on the sidewalk, we believe, the one who started walking toward Manitou Road, while the other two were in the neighbor's vehicle. So we think that was Brian Hopkins there. And then there is Christopher's 15-year-old cousin, James Cervini. These three teenagers had been drinking earlier in the night, and a toxicology report showed that Christopher Cervini was legally drunk at the time of his death. One of the teens had admitted they stole a bottle of gin, not sure from where, from who, and that they'd been drinking that. Additionally, Christopher Cervini had both marijuana and amphetamines in his system. This was 2009. Weed was not legal in 2009. Regardless, even now, users have to be 21 years old to smoke weed legally. Legal users. It is important to note the marijuana traces were consistent with a history of use, meaning the test showed that the night had not been the first night he had ever smoked weed. So we got alcohol, we got weed, everything's in his system. He's at a drunk, impaired point. As far as the amphetamines, Christopher Savini did not have a prescription for the drug, so the usage of amphetamines was also illegal. 3 illegal substances found in his system. Although during the trial, James Cervini testified both he and his cousin had their hands up and that Christopher never charged Roderick and still had their hands raised in the air when Roderick shot Christopher. That was the first time the defense had ever heard that particular claim, mind you. James had never mentioned this to anyone before until the trial. And while we're talking about 15-year-old James Cervini, records show the young teenager has been on probation twice before for assisting in burglary and holding the knife to the throat of a 10-year-old boy. Okay? All right. Roderick's attorney theorized on why Christopher might have charged Roderick in the first place. Because if James was caught by the police, he probably figured his little cousin was going to be in some big trouble. More probation or a harder slap on the wrist. Nothing serious, obviously, because he's 15. But maybe at that age, maybe at Christopher's age, he didn't realize how New York laws worked. And that James probably wouldn't have gotten in much trouble at all, which is unfortunate. Roderick's attorney played a recording of Roderick's call to 911 after the shooting, and he recounted the events in this call and explained everything, matching up to the testimony that he also gave during the trial. So Roderick is remaining consistent from the moment everything happened to the trial. He's not changing his story in any way. And although the prosecution indicated Roderick shot Cervini in the back, I am unable to find any evidence to support or contradict what the prosecution said. But I have heard it was 2 rounds to the chest. Both the defense and the prosecution finally rested at the trial, and the decision of guilt was now solely in the hands of the jury. And I should say, the decision of guilt or innocence was now solely in the hands of the jury. When the jury came back after deliberation, they deliberated, well, I believe it's 19 hours, and it was took place over the course of 2 days. The deliberation. When they came back, the courtroom was silent. Everyone in that room, in that courtroom, was hoping one way or the other. Right? You've got some people hoping that the jury found Roderick guilty, and you've got some people hoping that they find Roderick innocent. The thing with the jury trial is you never know which way it's going to end up. The verdict does come back, and they find Roderick Scott not guilty. Jim Cervini, Jim, this is Christopher's father, not James, the 15-year-old, but Jim Cervini, Christopher, Christopher's father, was quoted as having said, "The message is that we can all go out and get guns and feel free uh, and feel." And I apologize. The message is that we can all go out and get guns and feel anybody that we feel is threatening us and lie about the fact. My son never threatened anybody. He was a gentle child. His nature was gentle. He was a good person, and he was never, ever arrested for anything and has never been in trouble. He was 16 years and 4 months old, and he was slaughtered. This is what Christopher Cervini's father said and how he felt. I'm a father. I understand seeing a different side of someone because they're your child and maybe putting blinders on to other things because you don't want to see it for what it is. But I refuse to believe that the family didn't see any red flags. I refuse to believe that they didn't see any signs that Christopher might be using illegal drugs, drinking, I would question why he was hanging out with his law-breaking cousin. Now I get family; I'm Italian, right? We all hang out together and we don't judge each other. But the 15-year-old has got some serious crimes under his belt. And if I told my mother I'm going to go hang out with my little cousin who's 15, who's already been on probation twice for serious matters, and we're going to be out all night, yeah, I don't think my mom would let me. And it's that straightforward. My mom would not let me from an Italian mother. Trust me, I'm not going out. So I think you see what I'm saying. The assistant district attorney, Julie Finocchio, did not hide how she felt. She even was reported to have said, "I just hope it's not a message to the community that you have the right to shoot an unarmed 17-year-old kid for breaking into a car." I get what she's saying, but this isn't just a simple larceny that we're talking about that Roderick Scott interrupted. So that kind of statement, though, shows a biased lack of intelligence and common sense. And I'm gonna write the ignorance of that statement to the fact she was pissed. She lost a murder trial. That's probably what's going on here. She probably figured this was a slam dunk for her as a win, and it wasn't. A group of teenagers in the middle of the night breaking into cars is a serious threat. It is a dangerous threat. Some tried to make the case that Roderick was in the wrong. He shouldn't have gone outside. He shouldn't have confronted the teens. He shouldn't have brought a gun. I guess people who think like that prefer living in fear. Maybe they prefer to let crooks and criminals run amok during the middle of the night in their neighborhoods because they shouldn't go tell them to stop. That's where this society's been going, leading down this road where criminals have way more rights than law abiding citizens. This just illustrates it. All of this just illustrates it. And it infuriates me. Whew. Anyway, this is not me. This is not my neighborhood. I would be outside seeing what's going on, telling people to stop, calling 911. And I would have my gun on me at that time. Thank God I don't drive a Kia or a Hyundai, because I'm sure everyone listening to this episode is familiar with the epidemic of car thefts across the country right now. Some poser on TikTok gave a quick tutorial on how to break into these cars and then start them without keys. And then all the little gangbangers out there had to give it a try. In Rochester right now, we have a group known as the Kia Boys. I'm sure it's the same name of the same type of kids all across the country. And every night, and when I say every night, I mean every single night. I work at 911, remember? Every night they're out stealing Kias and Hyundais. They're smashing into them, getting them started, and then they joyride them. They smash them into poles. They crash them into buildings after recklessly racing them around the county. And of course, after they crash the cars up good, they take off running. So, like I said, I work in 911. I'm a dispatcher for 911. And if there are less than 6 Kias stolen a day, every day, I'd be shocked because I only work 8 hours, right, out of the 24 in a day, and we see a couple every night between midnight and 8. So I would like to guess that number's closer to 10. 10 Kias a day, per day, every day. My aunt, I'm so digressing in this one. I apologize. My aunt and uncle had their Kia broken into, window smashed, dash destroyed. But for some reason, the thugs couldn't get it started, so they just left it. So the dealership they took it to, where they got it from, had a 3-month estimate before they could even get to it to fix the damage. And they said nearly 200 other Kias were waiting to be repaired for similar vandalism. This is just one dealership backlog with repairing 200 Kias. In Rochester, I cannot tell you how many dealerships we have or mechanic garages. Anyway, anyway, in the Trayvon Martin and the Christopher Savini cases, um, being compared in 2012 and 2013, but because of race and treatment of George Zimmerman and Roderick Scott, race and treatment are not the purposes of this episode. I've said that more than once. Um, so that's I just want to keep that out there. There is no stand your ground law in New York, naturally, because New York, like I said, caters to the criminals. The thing is, when we say New York, everyone in New York knows we're talking about New York City, and that what is thought on the island and voted for is usually and vastly different from the bulk of the rest of the state. Unfortunately, the overpopulation in that city gives a larger voice when it comes to important matters like voting. And the rest of the state loses out because of the simple mindedness of Long Island and Manhattan. Sad, but it is true. So what is the stand your ground law? In a nutshell, sometimes it's called the line in the sand or no duty to retreat law. It provides that people may use deadly force when they reasonably believe it to be necessary to defend against certain violent crimes. And for the record, although the media will have people believe buying handguns is as simple as walking into a corner grocery store and adding one to your order along with a dozen eggs, in New York, that is not the case, nor has it been the case. There's an extensive police background check conducted. Friends and family are contacted with a host of questions by law enforcement as part of that legal background. You have to get fingerprinted. They review your medical records. You got to give them access to your medical records. The process can take anywhere from 4 or 5 months to well over a year. And now, today, there are even more hoops applicants must go through before they can receive a permit to carry. I know, I have mine, and getting a permit is not as easy as snapping one's fingers. And I respect the process because it is not a light matter. It's a serious one and should be taken seriously and is taken seriously by the counties in New York State. I don't have any problem with that. That's to ensure that the people who do own legally guns are in the best mindset to own that gun. So regardless of my personal rants today, Roderick Scott proved to a jury with the help of his defense team that he felt his life was in danger, and a jury agreed. In essence, the jury agreed with the guidelines of the stand your ground law, like it or not. They backed it. And I feel that justice was served. Okay. And actually, you know, Roderick's lawyer said, I just want to say that I hope this case sends a message to families out there to watch their kids, to know where they are and what they are doing. There can't be a better statement than that. I agree with the lawyer's sentiments, and I'm thankful Roderick Scott was able to find justice for the horrific incident. I'm sure, I'm 100% positive it still plagues his dreams to this day. I guarantee that this bothers him still, what happened. And while it is definitely a tragic loss for the Servini family and friends, Roderick Scott was no criminal. He broke no laws. He defended his property and the property of his neighbors. We have a very famous writer out here, a columnist, Bob Lonsberry, and he said, and I love this, it was the lunge, not the larceny. An unarmed teenager is potentially dangerous. 3 unarmed teenagers, and I can fully understand the fear Roderick must have felt at the time Cervini lunged at him. It was the lunge that caused the shooting, not the larceny. Roderick didn't feel he was in danger stopping the kids from breaking into the vehicles. It's when Cervini lunged for him. I don't care how many steps away he was from Roderick. There's a 10-foot rule that police use with somebody with a knife, where if they get within 10 feet, it's already too late. Okay? So it was the lunge, not the larceny. He wasn't out there shooting people because they were breaking into cars. That is the point that must have been made to the jury, and that is the point that the jury decided on. It wasn't them breaking into cars and he shot them. He was lunged at. Now I'm not sure what James Cervini or Brian Hopkins are currently up to. I did I did do some internet stalking to see if I could find Facebook or Instagram accounts, and I'm sure I found them, but I'm not positive enough uh, to comment on their doings today and their whereabouts. So if that's something you want to do on your own, you can. All I can hope is that that night in 2000 was an eye opener for them, and that they took some time to reevaluate the road they were on and did an about face and are now trying their hardest to do their best. That's what I hope. That tragedy had some positive way of influencing the rest of their decisions, their life's decisions. And for Roderick Scott, I hate that we keep bringing this topic up, but I feel it was an important episode to share. I hope you can understand where I'm coming from on that. Check in next Monday for more. Thank you for listening to What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. As always, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. New episodes every Monday.